Welcome to all. I'm very pleased to be opening and facilitating this national webinar on the role of data and innovation in a new Canadian water agency. My name is Pauline Gerard, and I'm Deputy Director of the International Institute for Sustainable Development's Experimental Lakes area. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm currently sitting in Winnipeg, Manitoba in Treaty 1 territory, the traditional land of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. And I'd like to pause for a moment for all of you to recognize the traditional lands on which you're sitting and pay respect to the treaties that were made on these territories. Today's webinar is the fourth in a series that have been ongoing since the spring, with the aim of facilitating a national dialogue on a new Canadian water agency. And in a moment, I will pass the microphone over to Dr. Tom Axworthy from the Munk School of Global Affairs at Massey College for opening remarks and to set the stage for this discussion. Before I do that, though, let me go over a few logistical items. Oop, there we go. Today's webinar is scheduled for an hour, and we'd like to try and keep it on schedule. Our agenda for today is welcome remarks from Dr. Tom Axworthy, panel presentations from Carolyn Dubois, Scott Higgins, Melissa Dick, and Jamie Smith. We've given them each the really challenging task of stating their main ideas in 5 minutes. So we're hoping that the presentations will be short, but we're also hoping that you have lots of questions. So while they're speaking, I would encourage everyone listening in to type questions into the question and answer box. If you scroll your cursor over the bottom of your screen, it should pop up. We should have roughly 25 minutes for an open discussion, during which time I will direct questions to the panelists. All questions and comments will be visible to everyone participating in the webinar, and although I'm sure we'll not be able to get to all of your questions, this is an opportunity to provide questions and comments to the larger group. So I would encourage everyone to participate in the discussion. Also, we're recording today's webinar, and a recording will be made available with a link distributed to all registered participants. So without further ado, I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Tom Axworthy to provide opening remarks.
Good. Well, thank you, and welcome to all who are tuning in to this important webinar. The idea of a Canada Water Agency has been promoted for some time because of the fact that the federal government has important responsibilities around water, but the organizational structures are very diffuse. Over 20 different programs and departments, ministries have some role in the important preservation of our fresh water resources. And therefore, there has been a goal for some time to see whether these pieces can be brought together and that the federal government could be in a stronger position to cooperate and work with municipalities, Indigenous self-governments, and the provinces. To that goal, to that end, some of us were very happy last year that the mandate letter of the Prime Minister to the Ministers of Agriculture and Environment mandated that they should be creating a Canada Water Agency. And we were even more pleased that Terry Duguid, the MP for Winnipeg South, was given the responsibility for working on and giving advice on that important priority. And Mr. Duguid's been active in the environment for a long time, well known to supporters of the IISD because of his work on experimental lakes with them some years ago. So we have a strong water advocate advocating for the Canada Water Agency. Now, with this work, we in the water community, with partners like IISD and the Gordon Foundation, the Bobian Foundation, Aqua Hacking, many partners, Polis, the Flow Group, have come together over the summer to pull together a series of webinars and public education issues around water. And we have had them on the broader issues of public policy, on agriculture and water, Indigenous rights and water. We will soon be having another webinar on a prairie water strategy. And the Bobian Foundation is sponsoring one on Quebec issues and water. And today we have a very important topic, which is innovation and data collection and the use of research and how that can contribute to a better water future for the country and the work of the Canada Water Agency. Since we've started these webinars and the work that we have done at Massey College with partners on the public education program, I can honestly say not one of those public outreach efforts has been without many questions about data. How is data about the quality of our water collected? How is it shared? How will it be used by decision makers? And this goes to the heart of the issue around the need for a Canada Water Agency, because we need up-to-date and relevant data on flood protection. We need it on the possibility of droughts. We need it on water quality. We need it so that communities know the strength and the quality of their water resources, and decision makers need it in real time so they can take relevant actions. So I couldn't be happier that under the sponsorship of the ISD and joined with colleagues from Experimental Lakes and the Department of the Environment, the Gordon Foundation, and the Aqua Forum, that we're going to spend a session on that critical issue which has been raised right across the country, which is the role of data and the possible role of a Canada Water Agency to help make that happen. We hope that in the next week, the speech from the throne will again have a strong emphasis on a robust water policy, and that the Canada Water Agency will be central to that. So in our next one of our seminar series today, we're looking at the critical issue of data, how it is collected, how it is used, and how we can have transparency and scientific accuracy so we can have the information to make informed water decisions. I'm very much looking forward to the seminar and to the questions. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very, very much, Tom. This discussion is so important for where we're going in terms of freshwater management in Canada. Your leadership as a national voice on freshwater governance and health has been instrumental. Thanks very much for opening the webinar. So we have 4 panelists who will lead today's discussion. We'll start with Carolyn Dubois. Carolyn is the director of the water program at the Gordon Foundation, where she works with partners across sectors in Canada. This work focuses on improving freshwater stewardship through citizen engagement and decision-making and the use of the best available evidence. Carolyn is a passionate advocate for open data and has led the development of DataStream, an online system that provides access to information about water quality. Over to you, Carolyn.
Thanks, Pauline. I'll just start off by saying that we really are thrilled at the Gordon Foundation to have an opportunity to be part of this conversation around a Canada Water Agency, and especially to be able to provide some ideas on a topic that we're so passionate about. So I want to start by just backing up from this question around data and innovation, and just say that when you look at all of what's happening across Canada, the technologies and the activities, the monitoring and the new ways of doing things, it's really clear that we have the ingredients that we need to do some truly innovative things around freshwater protection in this country. It's really just a question of pulling all of this together and making the most of what it is that we are doing. So I want to focus on an area that the Gordon Foundation has spent a lot of time thinking about, and that is around data access. It may surprise some Canadians to hear that it is very difficult to get your hands on water quality data to be able to answer some very basic questions around freshwater health across the country. And this isn't for lack of data being out there. There's so much research and monitoring happening. It's happening across sectors by organizations of all shapes and sizes. It's just that it's living in places that make it, or formats that make it inaccessible. So we're literally talking about everything from a filing cabinet to floppy disks to people's hard drives, or to closed and proprietary systems that people can't access. And this is a real challenge to innovation. We're not making the most of the investments that we're making in data collection and using that to address some very pressing challenges ahead. So we began working on this challenge many years ago through a partnership with the government of the Northwest Territories. And the monitoring that we were particularly inspired by at the time was that being done by communities throughout the Northwest Territories, which actually Michael Miltenberger spoke about in the series last week. So throughout the Northwest Territories, there are communities who are out there, they're collecting data in a program that's facilitated by the government of the Northwest Territories. And when we began working with the government there, we sought to find a way to pull all of that data together in one place so that it was available to everybody. So that was the sort of the birth of Mackenzie Data Stream, which is simply an open access platform for sharing water quality data. This is a free tool for anyone to use, and it's really easy to use. So please do have a look and play with it. Now, when we launched Mackenzie Data Stream, really not that long ago, just a few years ago, we began to hear from communities across the country who were saying, you know, we have the exact same challenge here. We're investing in monitoring. We have questions about our local watersheds, and we're actively getting out there to answer them, but we're not doing the most with our data. We want to pull that together, combine it with others, and be able to say something about what's happening on a watershed scale and make the most of this work. And so we began growing Data Stream across the country, and we've done that with some very, very close partnerships with other organizations in these places. And we're continually growing with new organizations coming on board every day. To date, we have over 100 unique data contributors, and this is from across sectors and jurisdictions, which is something that makes Data Stream really, really valuable. So just to bring this back to what the point of all of this data aggregation, why are we doing this? And the reason really is that until that data is available in formats that are machine readable and accessible, we can't start doing cool things around, like having everybody answer questions that they're interested in through interpretation and modeling tools of all kinds. If the raw data is not available for that, we can't get to that next stage of innovation. And if we don't get there, then we're unable to say things about, policy directions and actions we can take to protect our freshwaters. So we really see Data Stream as one component of this bigger picture around informed decision-making in Canada. So through this journey of building Data Stream and working very closely with monitoring programs of all sizes, and particularly community monitoring programs, it's really clear to us that there are some opportunities for the Canada Water Agency. So first off, there's all of this energy around data collection by communities. We've got a huge country and we have people in places, and they are best placed to see changes as they're happening, and they're generating high quality data. And so this, I think, the resilience of this model of involving people in their own water management was really illustrated during COVID. We had some real challenges getting out to monitoring sites through various government programs, and communities have been able to help fill some data gaps over this period of time. And that's really powerful stuff. So we would recommend to the Canada Water Agency that they put in place a framework for incorporating community generated data in their decision making. Communities want to see this data used. Second, there's a huge cultural shift towards open access internationally and within Canada. And the government of Canada has already taken, is showing leadership in this area. But I think the Canada Water Agency will be uniquely positioned to pull together data that's collected across many, many federal departments, but isn't being pulled together in a way that everyone can use yet. So, taking stock of what's out there and assessing how open it is, and then working to make it as available as possible, is something the Canada Water Agency could do immediately. And we would also say that should extend as well to programs outside of government that receive public funding. Unless there's a really good reason not to share data around privacy, concerns and sensitivities, particularly in Indigenous context, we really should be aiming to get the data that's publicly funded out there. Now, lastly, and this is a very dry point to end on, but it's a really important one, is there are very good models. There's robust data standards out there. They already exist, and they took years to build. And we would suggest that the Canada Water Agency adopt existing standards and adapt them for the Canadian context, and then champion them among programs within and outside of government. And we won't get into the details of what a data standard is, but a good analogy is, this is the equivalent, the water world equivalent of, we have a choice to follow the metric system or to build our own. And if we follow the metric system, we can do all kinds of things. So, you know, it makes science much easier. And so one of the biggest areas that we'll see this is cooperation among monitoring programs of all sizes within Canada and also within transboundary contexts. So I'll leave it there and look forward to questions.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Carolyn. Next up, we have Dr. Scott Higgins, a friend of mine and colleague from the International Institute for Sustainable Development's Experimental Lakes area. Scott's research focuses on algal ecology, primary production, climate change, and the effects of invasive species on freshwater ecosystems. He has received awards from Fisheries and Oceans Canada, the International Association for Great Lakes Research, and the Canadian International Development Agency. Over to you, Scott.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Pauline. So I think there are a number of perspectives on the Canadian Water Agency out there. And we feel very fortunate to be able to share our perspective too. And to understand it, it's probably good to know a little bit about who we are. So we are a small research focused not-for-profit organization. We're called the IISD, or International Institute for Sustainable Development's Experimental Lakes Area. So our mission is to provide science-based evidence to develop management and policy solutions. To understand a little bit about what we do, and many of you probably know a little bit about what we do, we're unique in the sense that we're able to undertake and facilitate large-scale, in many cases, whole lake experiments to address issues about science or policy. We operate a long-term monitoring program, so we collect a lot of data. We've had to manage that data, and we have an open data policy, and we've had it for a very long time. And that has opened a lot of doors for us. One, it helps to address problems and questions that we would have never asked ourselves. Other people are using our data to ask a whole bunch of questions and answer a lot of questions too. The other thing it's done for us is to facilitate a number of collaborations and partnerships. And it has been just a real boon for our organization. All of this is in support, like I said, of science and policy, or management and policy formation. But the other thing that we recognized was that without simply publishing our data in peer-reviewed journals was just not enough. If we really wanted to influence science and policy, that we needed to be more outward facing, and we needed to collaborate with a much broader group of stakeholders. So that's our organization in a nutshell. And so what is our view of the Canadian Water Agency and what it could be? I think if we were going to distill it down to its essence, that the Canadian Water Agency would develop a national water strategy. I think Carolyn and Tom both alluded to these points, is that, across the country, there are a lot of players and a lot of stakeholders in the water sector. All of us are doing our own independent things and answering our own questions. We're collecting our own pieces of the puzzle, but what we are missing is the big picture, that national picture. And water reaches into everyone's lives, whether it's through water security, food security, industry, recreation. It reaches into all of our lives, and it reaches, and maybe not surprisingly, reaches into almost all government departments, various levels of government. Everyone's collecting data, but it's not being put together. And so we really need the Canadian Water Agency to do that. And how we do it is through a few means. And one of them is to undertake routine national water assessments and forecasts. If I or any member of the public wanted to know, what's the status of a contaminant across a country, or as Carolyn said, just, simple questions about water quality or water scarcity across a country. We simply couldn't get the answers to those questions on a national scale because the data is so disparate. It's hiding, like she said, in filing cabinets and on hard drives. It's not together, and this is a real problem. So we would like to see the Canadian Water Agency sort of take that on as a challenge, be responsible for routine national assessments and forecasts that bring together data and monitoring groups. Now, this is very pertinent, obviously, and a focus of today's discussion. A lot of us are out there collecting data, but I'll ask you right now, is your data open? Is your province's data open? Is it findable, accessible, and interoperable? It should be, but it probably isn't. And from our perspective, the general lack of open data that has been collected in the name of the public, and often with the public purse, is not in keeping with the times. It hampers national assessments and perspectives, and it's holding back innovation in the water sector. So from our perspective, we want to see the Canadian Water Agency facilitate, speed up, and set standards for this open data. And the other benefit of this is once we have much more of our data open and we're able to assemble it into this sort of national assessment or this national picture, we're going to start to see where the gaps exist. And we fully expect there's going to be large gaps in the types of data collected, where it's collected, and how often it's collected. And so this will facilitate better data collection and the collection of data that's needed for policy and management. Now, another aspect of today's discussion is on innovation. And from the research side of things, I've noticed that one of the things that's changing in the water sector is an increase in the number of networks and even networks of networks that are being used to share data and address questions of continental or global change. Unfortunately, one of the other things that I've noticed is that when we participate in these studies, there's often very few other sites in Canada. And so we are left out and unable to put our nation's perspective into a global perspective. Canada has nearly half of the world's lakes, and we should be at the table. And so from our perspective, a great leap forward can be made through collaborative data platforms like Carolyn has just discussed. Now, another aspect of innovation falls under the heading of collaboration. So providing a platform, we want the Canadian Water Agency to provide a platform for the collaboration, knowledge exchange, and training. As I said, this sector is really big. It has many players and many organizations, and we need a mechanism to link expertise with the needs and to break down silos. And we hope the Canadian Water Agency can position itself and have some authority to be able to facilitate such partnerships. And this would allow innovation that's already occurring in the water sector to be more broadly used and broadly applied. And I think there's also a very strong role for the Canadian Water Agency to facilitate knowledge exchange and training. And this would allow innovation that's being used in some parts of the sector to be more broadly applied across the sector. And with that, I'll say thank you very much. Back to you, Pauline.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott. Our next speaker is Melissa Dick from Aqua Forum. Melissa is the Alumni Program Manager and Development Officer at Aqua Forum, where she supports the success of young Canadian entrepreneurs by helping them develop water tech startups via the organization's flagship program, the Aqua Hacking Challenge. Melissa is a strong believer in entrepreneurship, creativity, and innovation as the path towards a sustainable future. Melissa?
Thanks, Pauline. On behalf of Aqua Forum, we're very happy to be part of the organizing committee for this panel and to be able to share a little bit about what we do, particularly through our Aqua Hacking Challenge. So I'm the Alumni Program Manager and Development Officer for Aqua Forum, which is a Montreal-based nonprofit organization. And we differ from organizations like the Gordon Foundation and IISD in that we don't generate water data, but rather our programs rely on the access and availability of water and environmental data. So Aqua Forum's vision is to see improvements in the quality of freshwater in Canada to enhance public health. And the way that we support this vision is through the delivery of our Aqua Hacking Challenge, which is an 8-month-long water tech design competition that is hackathon meets business mentorship. So every Aqua Hacking Challenge starts first with bringing together local water stakeholders to identify the key water issues in that watershed. So for example, our current Lake Winnipeg Aqua Hacking Challenge, IISD is our regional partner. And so we'll speak to people like Scott and say, what are the issues in your watershed? What is impacting Lake Winnipeg? And what sorts of tech solutions could you need to solve those issues? So from there, those broader water issues are distilled down to a handful of problem statements, which are then presented to teams of motivated, creative, interdisciplinary young innovators. And they get to work on creating impactful and scalable tech solutions to address those very issues. So along the way, those teams are supported by water experts to keep them on track from a subject matter perspective, as well as by business mentors who help them lay the foundations upon which they can start their own startup or social enterprise, through which they can then deliver and scale their solution post Aqua Hacking Challenge. So since 2015, we've hosted 8 editions of the Aqua Hacking Challenge in watersheds across Canada. Participants in the challenge move on to become program alumni. And over the past 5 years, they've collectively established 30 startups and enterprises that continue to be active in the water sector today. So as you can see on this slide, Aqua Hacking alumni are working across different sectors of the water industry, from source water to tap water and everything in between. So even though their work focuses on very different stages of the water cycle, one thing they have in common is the need for good data to develop, maintain, update, and improve their technology innovations. And that data can come from many sources, such as data stream, and one of which is also from the federal government, provincial government, and municipal governments. Open access data is particularly important at the stage when participants are just experimenting and developing their idea, but it's also important for those with solutions that require longer term baseline or reference data. And of course, as alumni startups secure contracts or their innovations become more complex, they may have to negotiate access to restricted data, but this is to be expected for a more mature company that is growing and engaging with clients. Just to give you a quick idea of the diversity of the types of data required by Aqua Hacking participants and alumni to drive the innovations they have created, I'll quickly present to you 3 of our alumni startups that require a combination of free open access data, which is in the blue boxes, and restricted data, which is in the gray boxes. So Can Forecast developed an artificial intelligence algorithm that supports municipalities to more reliably predict E. coli outbreaks in recreational swimming areas, and also to identify at-risk pipes before they break. So meteorological data is particularly key for their algorithms, and they can get some of that through open data through Environment Canada, but the majority of their data sources actually require special access, most of which is provided through a municipal partner. GeoSapien developed Inundation, which is a web-based solution that helps reduce the environmental, economic, and social impacts of floods. And they rely also on a variety of open access data sources, but also on restricted information available only through partnerships with municipalities. And then Clean Nature, from last year's challenge, they decided to tackle the issue of excess road salt application and its impacts on our aquatic ecosystems. And they use a combination of open access, governmental data, and restricted data from private winter maintenance contractors for their artificial intelligence model. So Aqua Hacking alumni startups need to be resourceful and creative in how they gain access to those restricted data that are required to build and maintain their tech solutions. But it actually came to as a surprise to me when I asked them about their data needs, and they said sometimes they have to be just as resourceful when it came to accessing open data and incorporating it into their models. And this leads me to the recommendations that we'd like to offer to the Canada Water Agency in the context of data and innovation. So firstly, and this has been mentioned by Carolyn and Scott, the need for a comprehensive consultation process to ensure that national water data management and sharing is built with good open data standards and with the end user's needs in mind. So too often, governmental data is shared on open access platforms that are restrictive in how an end user, such as an academic or an entrepreneur, can access and use it. And secondly, there's a need to develop a federal funding program specifically for water technology enterprises and startups. While there are some federal funding programs for clean tech development and small or medium-sized businesses pursuing tech-driven innovation in general, there lacks dedicated support for water tech companies, especially for small, early-stage startups like the ones that I work with. So with that, I look forward to the discussion and the opportunity to get into some further detail on these points, and I'll pass it back to Pauline.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Melissa. And finally, we have Jamie Smith for Environment and Climate Change Canada. Jamie took on the role of Chief Data and Results Officer for Environment and Climate Change Canada on July 6th. So we're actually really happy to be able to put him on the spot, so new in this position. Jamie comes with a strong background in data management and collaboration, both within and outside of ECCC. He has worked for the Meteorological Service of Canada, the Privy Council Office, the Treasury Board Secretariat, and the Minister of Environment's Office. He was instrumental in the development of the first interdepartmental reporting accountability framework for climate change, and most recently has acted as a Director of Monitoring Strategies and Data Services for the Meteorological Service. We are very pleased to have him with us today. Over to you, Jamie.
Thanks, Blaine. I'll start off by just saying, repeating what Tom mentioned, that yes, our minister, along with the Minister of Agriculture, is in the lead to looking into and developing proposals for the Canada Water Agency. I can't really talk too much about exactly what the plans are, but I can tell you it's early days, and this is part of the engagement that we're doing to try to scope out what the Canada Water Agency roles and responsibilities should be, and put those to government. So I've already heard lots of input, which is fantastic, and look forward to hearing from you today. I'm gonna go over probably the principles that we're approaching data and thinking about data, and I'm hoping to get some feedback from you. And those principles, a lot were always raised by the other panelists, but I'd like to go through it in a more systematic sort of way and try to pull together what everybody's tried to say. I think we're hearing what we call in data management the FAIR principle, which is really findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability. And once we have that, that's when we can start having the fun. That's when we can start doing data analytics, doing data science. We can do things like forecasts and assessments that Scott pointed out, and facilitate really and identify where there are data gaps in Canada. Without having the data, we can't do that. So I want to go into some of those principles around data management, because you can't manage what you can't measure. So the first one I'm going to talk about is what was raised by many people, which is the accessibility interoperability. My experience is that 90% of the work in data management is actually about making data ready, so we can actually start doing things with it, like creating maps, leveraging artificial intelligence, like doing things like Aqua Hacking is doing, and what DataStream is doing to get that data out to people, and so they can use it for various things. And so we really want to mine that data. That is probably 90% of the work that needs to be done. I can tell you that actually finding the data is obviously a big problem, and even I know from my work with provinces and territories, they're not even aware what the federal government makes available. So I think a number of people have raised that issue. Melissa also raised the issue, I think, around data quality. If we don't know what the quality of the data is, it also is not very usable. If it's garbage in, it's garbage out, and how is that going to help decision making? So we need to think about adopting a principle of known data quality. And we do that through, when we data manage, we use the term metadata. That's a description of how the data is collected, when it's collected, where it's collected, so we can actually, the user can then assess how they can use that data for what principle. There can be different uses for different types of data, different quality of data, and that's not a problem. I mean, you might want to have a map of where vulnerabilities, communities are vulnerable in Canada, so you can determine where you need to focus your work on or your monitoring on to be able to monitor that. But you might need much more detailed and high quality data to be able to design a culvert to deal with flooding or droughts, as Tom also mentioned, that would be important to address. So data types and data formats are also a huge consideration that we have to think about. Climate change, of course, is a consideration that we'd have to think about how we need to incorporate that kind of information into these kinds of areas. So I'd like to have your perspective on what some of those outcomes are that we need to try to achieve at the agency. Data storage and retention was not something mentioned by others, but it is a preoccupation of mine. My background, as you outlined, is largely in climate change. And if we don't have historical data, we can't do good planning. We need to have historical data to understand what the variability of water supply and demand is. We need to better understand what the factors are that drive it over time. And so we need to have to consider having some sort of principle of how we store our data as well, and how long and where. Another principle I wanted to outline, and it was raised by a number of you, is actually data policy, so open access, guidelines and standards. Without those, we cannot make sure that data is freely accessible and available. And places like Aqua Hacking cannot take advantage of data stream, cannot take advantage of data that's elsewhere. They're obviously, having an open data policy is really important, but we do have to respect that there are certain limitations to that. We know that there has to be exceptions. The private sector does not provide data necessarily for free, so there might be proprietary data, but of course we have to respect Indigenous knowledge and the sharing, and have various codes and values, ethics associated with how we use our data. So clear standards on data interoperability, on metadata, on retention, and is really required. I'll also mention the issues around privacy and security around the data. That is obviously a concern of many people, and will be important for us. And finally, but was not necessarily mentioned, except for in the sense of that we need to collaborate better, is how do we have a governance system around? If we decide to have some sort of, and you're all mentioning some sort of platform, how do we manage that, maintain it, ensure that we're having standards adhered to and policies adhered to, and have commitment from partners to provide that data into some sort of system? And that will be really important. So that also is a place that I think Scott and others mentioned, of where we can collaborate with scientists and users to understand what data we need to have. And do we need things like, do we need real-time data? Tom referred to having forecasts, that's real-time. Or do we just want to deal with historical data to support planning? We have to decide on those factors. So a big challenge, I think, is going to be determine the scope of data and the outcomes that we're trying to achieve with a data. I would say he's got a data strategy as part of a larger national water strategy. And to do that, I think we really need to do some work on that. And we've, my group is already going to initiate and start an inventory of all the data sources in Canada and how they're disseminated, so we can start looking at that. We know a few things already, and you guys have already said this. We know that data is being collected by very many different people, but they might be using different methods and different standards. We know that there are many different places where data is being disseminated, but they're disparate and hard to find. We know that there are best practices, and I think Carolyn mentioned this. We know on water quantity, for example, that the federal and provincial and territorial governments have a very robust data management and dissemination system in place, with standards and data quality standards and metadata standards, and it is freely available. The question is, do people know where to find it? That might be a different question, but it is a good example of a strong data management system. We're thinking about looking at this inventory through 4 buckets. I'd like to hear you about that, your perspectives. Water quantity, water quality, water demand and use, and ecosystems. That would be interesting to know. So overall, I think the only issue that we really need the issues that I think we need to think about are really, do we have a vision of what the water agency would do in terms of data? That we have a policy and open and freely available data, that we have a known data quality policy as well. We talk about retention, private security, values and ethics, and governance. So I'd be interested in if we missed anything, because I think those have all been touched on here today. And concurrently, of course, we need to look at those dissemination systems and how we might be able to leverage each other and how we're working. Obviously, the good examples of Aqua Hacking and the examples that Carolyn in the data stream are places where data is already being shared. So how can we come together as a community and ensure that data is available to Canadians in the most efficient way and leveraging each other? So I'd like to know that. So in conclusion, just over the next year, we're going to try to better understand how things are going. It's likely likely to be a long journey and a difficult journey. Otherwise, somebody would have done it by now. And I think we need to consider an approach, where we might have to have a phase approach where we look at what data is already interoperable as a first stage, and we kind of can look at different models of how that data might be being available, whether it's just a discovery portal where we can find the data, or where we actually look at a full-fledged data management system with tools and visualization tools. That has yet to be determined. So thank you very much. It's going to be a long journey, and I look forward to hearing your perspectives. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jamie. So now we're going to enter the sort of question and answer portion of this webinar. I'd ask all the panelists to turn their videos on, and I'm going to pull questions that participants have put into the question and answer box and direct them at each of you. And please, for all of those of you online, continue to ask questions in the box. We're going to try and have a bit of an open discussion and see how it goes. It's always challenging virtually when you can't look people in the eye, but we're going to give it our best shot. So I'm going to start with Carolyn. Actually, there's a number of questions about quality assurance and quality control, and you talked a little bit about data stream and what you've done, but I wonder if you could elaborate about the kinds of control procedures that you have experience with and would recommend. And
yeah, for sure. And I'm really happy that this question was asked, because it's a very important one. So the answer to this is that monitoring programs, so the data owner, is responsible for doing a certain level of quality control on their data sets before they set out to upload it to DataStream. But DataStream also does have in place a very robust system to have both observation level metadata and data set level metadata. And I won't get into what that means, except to say that this provides a lot of context on that data set. Why was it collected? What was the question? What were the methods? You know, all of these things are included as part of the package that comes with the data set. Now, what's important with open data from then on is that it's then on the end user's end to essentially assess fitness for use. So depending on the question that they might be asking, they have to look at the data sets available on a platform like DataStream or elsewhere and say, is this of sufficient quality for the question that I'm trying to answer? And they make that determination. And so that's how we address it.
that makes sense. And would you envision, or Jamie, maybe you want to jump in, but any audit systems as part of quality control management or multi-level standards?
I'll just agree with what Carolyn had to say. It's really important to have that metadata to understand and what's fit for use is hugely important. I think it's hugely diverse. The difference between a flood agency and a province versus the Canadian public understanding, you know, getting simple information about warnings is a very different type of kind of information. So when we think about the scope that's going to be in a water agency, we have to decide who we're supporting for what purposes, and understanding data quality is fundamental to that and making it fit for purpose. So I'd say that. In terms of audits, I think if you're referring to data audits, or if you're referring to assessments, as Scott was referring to, like assessing what the state of water is in Canada. Of course, the government does do some work under the Canadian Environmental Canadian Environmental Massey, if all the things are, I'll get in trouble for not remembering the name of it, but it does have indicators that we publish. You know, maybe we can build upon those kinds of assessments to get them to a scale that might be of interest to more parties.
So many academic water scientists collect high quality and quantity data. This is kind of a question to anybody who wants to jump in. How would any of you envision a mechanism whereby these data sets could be integrated into an open CWA data platform?
I can speak to that quickly. A lot of participants that come and join and participate in the Aqua Hacking Challenge actually come from the academic realm. And so they're undergrad students, they're master's and PhD students from all disciplines, but really primarily from the environmental science side. And so they, in thinking up of solutions, will refer sometimes to the data that they have available, or maybe that they've collected themselves through a lab or through research projects and thesis projects. And so they can use that data in that way. And then as for open access, making that data open access from the academic standpoint, I'm not sure about that. I can't speak to, different institutions will have different practices, and perhaps different labs and departments will have different practices. But that's certainly, from our perspective, a very, very important source of information. And of course, is up to internal conversations to see how that could be shared more broadly.
Yeah, maybe I could speak just a little bit to that too. So we collect a lot of data, and we work with a lot of academics who are collecting data, and we publish a lot of data. And one of the things we're noticing in the discipline is that journals are now requiring data repositories. And this is just going to become more and more common. So as academics, we're going to have to be placing our data and sharing our data, our raw data, much more broadly than we are. Now, I would argue that we don't want every single person to be starting their own data management platform, because part of this is about finding the data. And if everyone has their own platform, it's going to be really challenging to find data and bring it all together. So let's build on the platforms that already exist. Maybe we do need some new platforms too, but let's not have every single individual developing their own data management system. I think in many cases we can use the ones that are existing already, like the ones that Carolyn has demonstrated.
So Carolyn, kind of building on your experience with DataStream, what would you recommend, and what did you provide in terms of support for communities collecting data and entering it into a larger kind of portal, or providing that data, getting involved in this big task of data collection?
So that's a very good question. We always say, we invest in software and some of the things that you'll see online, but a lot of our work is actually hands-on work with data holders of all kinds in helping them sort of get their data into shape so that it can be shared online. This is a lot of work. A lot of work happens before the data is uploaded. And I would actually, just to comment on the academic context, I would say it's starting, but I think we need to see this more, is when you're designing a monitoring program, funders have to think about providing dedicated funds for data management. For a long time, a lot of money was put into, you thought first about just getting the data and then didn't think about what would actually happen to the data set itself at the end of the day. So that has to be thought about at the beginning of a research program. And that's the same for a community monitoring program or an academic. It doesn't matter who you are, you have to think about it at the get-go. And that makes things easier for organizations like ours when we come in. So I guess what I would say is, we do offer some really great webinars if you're interested in learning more about how to manage your data. And this is intended for people with all backgrounds. And one of our principles is that when we work with organizations, we try to meet them where they're at in terms of their data management abilities and help them problem solve, from everything to, what is their open data policy, to, how to use Excel to format their data sets. So that's the kind of work that we do. It's very hands-on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Jamie, I'm going to point this one to you to start, and then others can weigh in. So monitoring and data collection is typically driven by the questions needed to be answered. So with different water stressors across provinces and territories, how will this impact the development of a Canadian water agency and national water strategy?
Oh, that's an easy question, right? I guess my answer is going to be, it depends. Already, what we do know, as I mentioned the example for water quantity, it is well defined. Actually, there's ministerial agreements between provinces and the federal government to manage that national program. And they regularly have governance in place to determine what the priorities are and where they need to do that monitoring. It doesn't mean there isn't still gaps, right? Because obviously we have limited funding, and so do the provinces. So the North is generally a gap that's well understood. So that's going to be obviously an area, as I mentioned, 4 buckets: water quality, water quantity, water demand and use, and then ecosystems, which is the tough one. Maybe Scott can help me on that one. And I think that you look at defining those buckets, and we're assessing, we feel, and I think Carolyn has even mentioned to me in the past that, one of the reasons they focused on water quality is because that was an area where there wasn't a lot a lot of information and it needed help. So I think it's going to depend on the drivers of how we decide of what really needs to be a priority here and where the gaps exist. And we can only do that by doing what we're trying to do now. And I'm hoping that the government will have a discussion paper that will come forward to ask these questions more directly of what is the agency game to have. Tom has some really interesting views about it actually should be dealing with forecasts and assessments, and I think that's a valid point that needs to be considered. In terms of the data management systems itself, we need to determine what the outcomes we're trying to achieve, and then we need to drive and understand what data we need to collect and put into a portal. To address Scott's sort of point about portal and portals of portals that exist, they're all over the place. And there is no need to create new ones. We have volunteer citizen science portals that exist. The federal government drives some, Carolyn does some, others do it. So we need citizen science in there as well. And how do we capture that data when it can maybe fill gaps that we can't afford necessarily to fill through our national programs now? So I think it's through engagement and through governance, we need to actually determine what the outcomes we're trying to achieve and what's possible. And I do think, as I said, it's going to have to be a phased approach. We can't, this is going to be a long journey, right? I mean, we know that in some areas we can make big progress, but maybe we have to really think about this as a long-term process.
Yeah, maybe I could just add on one small point. And I agree with everything Jamie just said. I think, when you look across agencies and jurisdictions in terms of water quality, there's already a number of indicators that most organizations are collecting. But one of the things that I think it could be new and that the Canadian Water Agency could help facilitate is making sure that the questions related to policy and the data that's being collected that needs to be collected for policy is also collected. And some of these may be emerging issues, and it doesn't mean that they have to be collected every year, but the Canadian Water Agency could work with all of the stakeholders to try to make sure that those new issues and those new data are being collected in a manner that can be compared straight across the country. So I think there's sort of a hybrid approach here.
It seems to me, if we think about Melissa and Aqua hacking as well, the kinds of data that those sorts of innovators would also need would be critical to include on that list. I don't know if Melissa, you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I'll add just a quick comment. And it's been interesting with our programming. We're very grounded in a regional approach. And so an aqua hacking challenge will focus on, let's say, like the Lake Winnipeg Basin for that challenge specifically. And those issues are determined by local stakeholders. But what we're seeing increasingly is that those same issues are being experienced in other places. It's very rare that we're going to have one water issue affecting a single watershed. And so in doing that consultation on a local level, we've been helping drawing some similarities across the country and looking at what some broader national level questions are. We're excited to see that regional approach is helping identify some of that.
Jamie, there's a couple of questions about how you're working with other government agencies and the role that they may have in the Canadian Water Agency, the National Water Survey, NRCan, for example. Do you want to comment on that a little bit?
Sure. So we just recently established a group, an interdepartmental group, to look at this issue of data management and how we're doing it. The main player, of course, here at Environment Canada, we deal with water quality and water quantity and ecosystems, but of course, Agriculture and Agri-Food and Stats Canada and Department of Fisheries and Oceans and the Natural Resources Canada all do have programs, and many others do as well, but those are probably the big five. And we are starting to work together. There is something that people may know of called the Federal Geospatial Platform, which is actually a platform that Natural Resources Canada runs, which actually provides access to geospatial data. It's not necessarily all the same interoperability at this point, but it is. I talked to Scott's point about we want to maybe leverage existing portals or platforms. We're meeting with them on the technical side as well. So we're it's where we're starting first in terms of our coordination of where we get data and how we do it, so many of those programs already work with provinces and territories. I would say we probably need to think about how we better engage others actually more formally in the process and getting their data. My experience in the weather and climate side is that provinces and territories really do, for the most part, want to participate as well. So I wouldn't put them outside. I think they're a huge part of the equation. And they're, of course, they're responsible for so much of water management. We're talking about data here, but when we talk about water management itself, obviously flood forecasting is the responsibility of the provinces for the most part, except for in interjurisdictional water basins where we all have a role.
Tom, I know you've been thinking a lot about this. I want to let you get a word in edgewise and sort of your kind of thinking about governance and Canadian Water Agency. Wait, you got to unmute yourself though.
Okay, one of the points that has just been made and right throughout the discussion today has been lots of expertise and lots of information, but difficulties in bringing it together to get an overall comprehensive picture. So that is really what we hope would be one of the main functions for the proposed Canada Water Agency to facilitate that. And I would go further than just on the specific area of data that we've been talking about, important as that is. But I think that the agency could have a very important convening role by bringing together annually or every 2 years the wide swath of experts in the water community and communities, to bring them together to talk about their views of what the national water policy should be and how their work could impact on a national policy. That is, at least once a year or once every 2 years, we should try to bring together all the major players to get that perspective, and then to see what commonalities there are, is there an agreed upon set of priorities. We certainly don't have that in the country. We are all trying to work together episodically and ad hoc, but a convening role, it takes some resources, but a convening role would be a very important job, I think, of the agency, to bring people with the ideas and the data together and then see collaboratively and collectively if we could move the country forward. So that's an important impact that a national agency could do as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I mean, there's nothing like coming together with related experts. Even just here on this webinar, it's super interesting to see the different kind of perspectives and expertise at the table. So we're almost at the end of the hour. I have just a last question about about innovation and fostering business and R&D in Canada. And I'll put it to Jamie to start and then just let anybody else kind of speak to it. But, you know, that is really one of the opportunities here, I think, is to foster innovation around freshwater science. We are leaders internationally in freshwater science, and we know that here in Canada. So how can we use that to grow our R&D sector and use this opportunity of the Canadian Water Agency to do that? Jamie?
It's a good question and a tough one. I don't think I have the expertise to talk to all of that. What I could talk to you about is the innovation that could stem from doing a better job of having data available, obviously, to understand what where technologies and what technologies go forward. I could talk about IMIT technology growth and the growth of data analytics and data science to better help us mine the existing data we have now to help drive innovation. And to have industries understand where they could play a role. So I think that I'm only going to be able to talk to it from a sort of data perspective. I'm not a technology expert. That maybe Melissa can add more to that. But I would say that you know, data is I don't like to use this phrase necessarily, but it is kind of the new gold or the new oil. It is the place that we're mining and where innovation and so much of our service economy is being driven by. That really is exciting to me personally, and exciting, I think, to our department. We're really looking at how to do that. And that's part of the reason they created chief data officers like myself in departments, is to actually look strategically at how we can innovate and to use data to a better way to sort of support innovation. So that's all I can speak to.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at the Gordon Foundation, Aqua Hacking, and ISD Experimental Lakes area, we've all used data and water science for innovation. So maybe I'll just let each of you say just one word to kind of finish off on that theme. Melissa, you want to start?
Sure. It's a really great question, and I would say that within our organization and the startups that we help establish in the water sector, a lot of them are focused on that municipal level or, you know, smaller scale governmental level, but it's recognized across, you know, the municipal partners and within those startup founders. They say that data is one of the best resources to manage future uncertainties. So municipalities are now seeing, okay, it's not going to get any easier. Water resource management is not going to get easier. We're going to get more floods. There's going to be more extreme weather events. How can we start incorporating innovation now in our systems and processes to do that? And they've had good success in working with smaller startups in testing new solutions and seeing, you know, where can we start to eventually pave the path forward to be better prepared in the future. So we've seen good success at that level, and we hope that whatever that looks like adapted at a federal level, we'll be very excited to see.
Fantastic. Scott?
Sure. I guess I see on the innovation side, you know, innovation is being used all throughout the water sector already, but it's being used disproportionately. And so I could see a real role of the Canadian Water Agency help making those connections between the people who are using it and the needs that exist on the ground. And by doing that, the innovation is going to be more broadly accepted and used by the community, and that's going to push the R&D sector, especially into areas where there are more demands for that innovation. So the successful and those types of innovation that are very useful for people widely, it's really going to push those private sectors forward as well.
Carolyn, last word.
Very briefly, I'll just say, you know, we see data stream as infrastructure to support a lot of really, really cool work out there. And I want to highlight again, community monitoring. With technologies of all kinds, it's making it possible for people to engage in this in a way that it was done, but maybe not this way. So I think that this is a really exciting time to look at how we're monitoring and finding solutions to some of the challenges that we're facing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So we're at the end of the hour. I really want to thank all of the panelists for this really inspiring discussion, and to Tom Axworthy for opening the webinar today. Also, thanks to Global Water Futures and the Monk School of Global Affairs for leading this conversation on a new Canadian water agency. There's a number of webinars still coming up in the series, including a doubleheader planned for October 13th, organized by the De Gaspé-Beaubien Foundation. So you can see the slide there. These webinars will focus on the role of Quebec within the Canadian Water Agency and the awareness of Canadians about water issues. So watch for the registration for these webinars in your inboxes very soon. Thank you very much to everyone. Anyone who wants to access past resources related to this conversation, just search Global Water Futures, Water Security for Canadians, and it'll come up that way. Good luck, Tom and everyone, and thanks everyone for participating. Have a really wonderful afternoon.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks.
Bye.